It begins on a stormy night when a loyal farm dog plunges into a swollen pond. Out of the dark water, he drags a tiny, gasping kitten, frail, helpless, and barely clinging to life. Everyone believes the little creature won't last a day, but the dog refuses to give up, standing guard through hunger, storms, and prowling predators. Against all odds, the bond between them grows into something extraordinary. Yet just when their story feels like one of survival and loyalty, everything changes. The protector finds himself trapped, broken, and in deadly danger. No one is there to help, except for the one creature he once saved. And in that moment, the fragile life that was once dismissed as too weak does something no one could have ever imagined. How far can loyalty go? And when the roles reverse, can the smallest really save the strongest? Your presence here is powerful. In a world full of noise, it's the quiet gestures of compassion that truly stand out. If your heart still makes room for kindness, you're already one of us. The summer sun beat down on the Whitfield farm, its rays warming the rich Tennessee soil where generations had worked the land. The sprawling property, with its weathered barn and neat rows of crops, spoke of both hard work and tradition. Harold Whitfield stood at the edge of his cornfield, his broad shoulders and weathered face testament to years spent under that same sun. "Maria," his deep voice carried across the yard. "Get those chickens fed before the storm hits." 12-year-old Maria Whitfield hurried across the farmyard, her long chestnut hair swaying in the growing breeze. Dark clouds were gathering overhead, promising a heavy summer storm. Buck, their loyal German shepherd mix, trotted beside her, his black and tan coat gleaming despite the dimming light. I know," Maria murmured to Buck as she scattered feed for the chickens. "Daddy's always worried about getting everything done." The dog's warm brown eyes watched her knowingly, his tail wagging gently. Buck had been her constant companion since she was little, understanding her in ways her practical father never seemed to. The first fat drops of rain began to fall as Maria finished her chores. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Buck's ears perked up alertly. Harold's voice called out again, "Maria, get inside now!" But something caught Maria's attention, a strange splashing sound coming from the pond. Through the increasing sheets of rain, she squinted at the water's surface. There, in the middle of the pond, something small thrashed desperately against the churning water. Before Maria could even call out, Buck's powerful body tensed. With a sudden burst of speed, he raced toward the pond, launching himself into the rain-swollen water. Maria's heart pounded as she watched her dog swim powerfully through the waves. "Buck!" she screamed, fear gripping her chest as lightning flashed overhead. The dog paddled determinedly, reaching the struggling form. With gentle but firm jaws, Buck grabbed hold and began swimming back to shore. Maria ran to the pond's edge, heedless of the mud and rain, as Buck emerged from the water with his precious cargo, a tiny, soaked gray kitten. "Oh my goodness!" Maria gasped, quickly taking off her jacket to wrap around the shivering creature. The kitten was barely bigger than her hand, its gray tabby fur plastered to its thin frame. "You're safe now, little one. Buck saved you." "Maria!" Harold's voice was closer now, sharp with concern and anger. "What in heaven's name are you doing out in this storm?" She turned to face her father, clutching the bundled kitten close. "Daddy, Buck saved this kitten from drowning. We have to help it." Harold's face hardened as he looked at the tiny creature. "That thing's half dead already. Nature takes care of its own, Maria. Now get inside before you catch your death." "But Daddy, please, we can't just let it die." Maria's voice cracked with emotion. Buck stood beside her, his fur dripping, but his stance protective of both Maria and his small rescue. "I said no." Harold's voice was firm. "That kitten won't survive the night, and I won't have you getting attached to something that's just going to break your heart. No animals in the house except Buck. That's final." Tears mixed with rain on Maria's cheeks as she watched her father stride back towards the house. Buck whined softly, nudging her hand with his wet nose. Looking down at the kitten's tiny face, Maria saw a spark of life in its green eyes that touched her heart. "I'm going to call you Ash," she whispered to the kitten, "and I'm not giving up on you." That night, after her father had gone to bed, Maria crept out to the barn. Buck followed silently, keeping watch as she made a soft nest of old towels in a corner. She had smuggled some warm milk and an old heating pad from the house. "Look what Buck brought you, little Ash," she said softly, settling the kitten into its makeshift bed. "He must have known you needed help, and now we're both going to take care of you." Buck lay down beside the nest, his large body providing additional warmth. The kitten, though weak, managed to lap at the offered milk. Maria's heart swelled with hope as she watched Ash's tiny pink tongue dart out again and again. "You're going to prove Daddy wrong," she promised, stroking the kitten's damp fur. "You're stronger than he thinks. Buck knows it too, don't you, boy?" The big dog's tail thumped against the barn floor in agreement, his eyes never leaving the tiny creature he had rescued. In that moment, as the storm raged outside, an unspoken bond formed between the unlikely trio: the gentle farm girl, the protective dog, and the tiny kitten who had survived against all odds. Maria stayed in the barn until Ash fell asleep, curled up against Buck's warm side. As she reluctantly headed back to the house, she knew she would have to be careful to keep her father from discovering their secret. But looking back at Buck keeping watch over his tiny charge, she felt certain they were doing the right thing. Sometimes, she thought, her father's practical nature made him forget that the smallest things could have the biggest hearts. The first rays of morning sunlight crept through the barn's wooden slats, falling across Buck's watchful form. The large German shepherd hadn't moved from his post all night, his body curved protectively around the tiny grey bundle that was Ash. Maria tiptoed into the barn, carrying a small bowl of warm milk and leftover scraps from breakfast wrapped in a napkin. "Good morning, you two," she whispered, kneeling beside them. Buck's tail thumped softly against the hay-strewn floor, but he maintained his position beside the kitten. Maria's heart swelled at his dedication. Ash lay curled in the nest of towels, looking even smaller in the morning light. The kitten's breathing was shallow but steady, its thin sides rising and falling with each breath. Maria gently stroked the damp fur, feeling the slight warmth that meant life still clung to the tiny body. "Come on, little one," she coaxed, dipping her finger in the warm milk and bringing it to Ash's mouth. "You need to eat to get strong." At first, there was no response. Then, ever so slightly, a tiny pink tongue darted out to lick the milk. Maria's eyes filled with tears of relief. Buck whined softly, nudging the kitten with his nose as if encouraging it to take more. "That's it," Maria whispered. "Good job, Ash." The barn door creaked open, and Maria quickly pulled the towel over the milk bowl. Harold's broad shoulders filled the doorway, his expression stern as he surveyed the scene. "Buck," he called sharply. "Come on, boy. Time for morning rounds." But Buck didn't move. He remained firmly in place, his dark eyes meeting Harold's with quiet determination. Maria held her breath, watching her father's face darken with disapproval. "That dog's got work to do," Harold said gruffly. "Can't waste time babysitting something that won't make it through the week." "Buck knows what he's doing, Daddy," Maria said softly, finding courage in her dog's steadfast loyalty. "He saved Ash for a reason." Harold shook his head. "Nature's got its own way, girl. Not everything's meant to survive. Buck, come." Still, Buck remained, his body a gentle fortress around the kitten. Harold muttered under his breath and strode away, leaving the barn door open in his wake. Maria could hear him talking to her mother in the distance, their voices carrying through the morning air. "That dog's gone soft," Harold was saying, and Maria's feeding false hope into that situation. Her mother's response was too quiet to hear, but Maria knew she wouldn't intervene. This was how it had always been, her mother keeping peace by keeping silent, while Maria's heart pulled her in directions her father couldn't understand. Throughout the day, Maria snuck back to the barn whenever she could. Each time, she found Buck in the same spot, moving only to adjust his position around Ash or to accept the water and food she brought him. The kitten slowly began taking more milk, its tiny body fighting for every bit of strength. By evening, Ash had managed to lift its head, those striking green eyes focusing on Maria's face as she fed it. The sight filled her with hope, even as her father's words from dinner echoed in her mind. Waste of time and resources, caring for something too weak to fend for itself. But Maria saw something different. She saw the way Buck shared his body heat through the cool nights, the way he gently cleaned the kitten's fur with his tongue, the way he seemed to understand that this tiny life needed him. And she saw how Ash responded, pressing closer to Buck's warmth, accepting his care with a trust that seemed to grow stronger by the hour. "You're not weak," she whispered to Ash, watching the kitten take its biggest meal yet. "You're just different, and that's okay." Buck's unwavering dedication began to change things in subtle ways. Other farm animals seemed to sense his commitment, giving the barn corner a wide berth. Even the usually noisy chickens grew quiet when they passed near Ash's nest. It was as if Buck's protection had established an unspoken boundary, creating a safe space where the kitten could heal. A week passed, and despite Harold's predictions, Ash grew stronger. The kitten's fur began to fluff out, revealing a handsome grey tabby pattern. Its movements, though still wobbly, became more coordinated. Maria found herself smiling each time she entered the barn, greeted by the sight of the unlikely pair. The massive dog and the tiny kitten, bonded by something deeper than size or strength. One morning, Maria arrived to find Ash attempting to climb Buck's tail, tiny claws catching in the thick fur. Buck lay perfectly still, allowing the exploration with patient dignity. The sight brought tears to Maria's eyes, happy ones this time. "See, Daddy," she whispered to herself. "Sometimes the things you think are too weak to survive just need a chance, and someone to believe in them." Harold might still view it as wasted effort, might still shake his head at Buck's continued vigil, but Maria knew better. In that quiet corner of the barn, she was witnessing something remarkable: the power of unwavering loyalty, the strength that comes from being protected while you grow, and the simple truth that sometimes the biggest hearts come in the smallest packages. Buck's dedication had done more than keep Ash alive. It had carved out a place for the kitten in their farm's harsh world, a place that even Harold's disapproval couldn't erase. Every time he passed the barn and saw Buck still at his post, his frown deepened, but he stopped trying to call the dog away. It was a small victory, but to Maria, it felt like the beginning of something important. The late summer sun cast long shadows across the Whitfield farm as Ash took its first tentative steps beyond the barn's safety. The kitten's whiskers twitched nervously, testing the unfamiliar air. Behind him, Buck's steady presence provided silent encouragement, his large form a protective shadow. Maria watched from the fence, her heart swelling with pride. In the weeks since Buck had pulled Ash from the pond, the kitten had grown from a wet scrap of fur into a curious explorer, still small for its age, but gaining confidence day by day. "That's it, Ash," she whispered, not wanting to startle the kitten. "You can do it!" Ash paused at the edge of the barn's shadow, green eyes wide as saucers. The open field must have seemed enormous to such a tiny creature. Buck nudged the kitten gently with his nose, and Ash took another step forward, paws testing the sun-warmed grass. The evening air was sweet with clover, and soon Ash's natural curiosity overcame its fear. The kitten ventured further into the field, batting at grasshoppers and studying every new sight with intense focus. Buck kept pace, never more than a few steps away, his ears constantly moving to track any sounds that might signal danger. Maria's smile faded as her father's heavy footsteps approached behind her. Harold Whitfield stood beside her, watching the unlikely pair with his usual frown. "That cat's going to get itself killed out there," he said, crossing his arms. "Nothing but coyote bait. Buck won't let anything happen to Ash." Maria insisted, though her father's words sent a chill through her. She knew the coyotes came down from the hills sometimes, hunting in the twilight hours. But surely they wouldn't dare come so close to the farm buildings. Harold shook his head. "Buck's got better things to do than babysit. We need him watching the sheep, not playing nursemaid to some stray." Before Maria could argue, her father strode away to check the evening's chores. She turned back to watch Ash and Buck, trying to push away her worry. The kitten had ventured nearly 20 feet from the barn now, learning to stalk through the tall grass like its wild ancestors. As the sun sank lower, Maria reluctantly called them in. Buck herded Ash back toward the barn with gentle efficiency, clearly understanding the dangers of twilight. The kitten seemed to have enjoyed its adventure, prancing along with its tail held high. But 2 nights later, Maria's fears proved terrifyingly real. She was heading to the barn for evening chores when she heard it, the distinctive yipping of coyotes, much too close to the farm. Her blood ran cold as she remembered Ash had been playing in the field again. She ran toward the sound, her heart pounding. In the dimming light, she could make out 3 shadowy forms slinking through the grass. Buck's thunderous bark split the air, and Maria saw him charging toward the coyotes, his powerful body launching between them and a terrified Ash. The kitten was frozen in place, fur standing on end, as Buck confronted the predators. The largest coyote snapped at Buck's flank, but the farm dog was faster. He spun with surprising agility, teeth bared in a snarl that made even Maria step back. 2 of the coyotes retreated a few paces, but the leader held its ground. Buck's growl grew deeper, more threatening. He was outnumbered, but determination radiated from every muscle. This was no longer the gentle giant who let Ash climb on his tail. This was a warrior defending his own. The standoff seemed to last forever. Maria wanted to run forward, to help somehow, but she knew she would only make things worse. She watched in terror as the lead coyote lunged again, this time catching Buck's shoulder with its teeth. Buck didn't flinch. He launched himself at the coyote with such force that both animals rolled in the grass. The other coyotes darted forward, but Buck's fury was magnificent to behold. He fought like a creature possessed, snapping and snarling until finally the wild dogs turned tail and fled. Only then did Buck relax slightly, though he remained alert as he limped back to where Ash cowered in the grass. The kitten immediately pressed against Buck's legs, trembling but unharmed. Maria ran to them both, tears streaming down her face. "Buck, you're hurt." She examined the bite on his shoulder, which was bleeding but didn't appear too deep. The dog seemed unconcerned with his injury, focused entirely on nudging Ash toward the safety of the barn. Harold appeared moments later, drawn by the commotion. His face was grim as he surveyed the scene. "Told you that cat would bring trouble," he said, but his voice lacked its usual harshness. He examined Buck's wound with careful hands. "Could have lost my best dog over a worthless stray." Maria stroked Ash's fur, feeling the kitten's racing heart. "But he wasn't lost, Daddy. Buck chose to protect Ash. Doesn't that mean something?" Her father didn't answer immediately. He watched as Buck settled himself in his usual spot in the barn, Ash huddled close against his side. The kitten was still shaking, but gradually relaxing under Buck's steady presence. Means that dog's got more heart than sense, Harold finally said. But Maria noticed he brought out the special liniment they used on injured livestock, carefully cleaning Buck's wound himself. Keep that cat in the barn from now on, you hear? Can't be risking Buck like this again. It wasn't exactly acceptance, but it was something. Maria nodded, understanding that her father's gruff concern for Buck was the closest he'd come to acknowledging Ash's place on the farm. That night, Maria stayed in the barn longer than usual, watching over her charges. Buck's breathing was steady and strong, despite his injury. Ash had finally stopped trembling and fallen asleep against the dog's warm side. The bond between them seemed stronger than ever, forged in the face of danger. "Thank you," Maria whispered to Buck, scratching behind his ears. "You're the bravest dog in the whole world." Buck's tail thumped once against the straw, but he didn't move from his protective position around Ash. Maria smiled through her lingering tears, knowing that while her father might not understand, she was witnessing something truly special, a friendship that transcended nature's usual boundaries, built on loyalty and trust. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Whitfield farm as Harold paced their worn kitchen floor, his work boots leaving dusty prints on the wooden boards. Through the screen door, Maria could see several of their neighbors gathered on the porch. Mr. Jensen from the dairy farm down the road, old Mrs. Cooper who raised sheep, and the Williams brothers who owned the property that bordered their western fence line. "Found another trap just yesterday," Mr. Jensen was saying, his weathered face creased with worry. "Nearly lost one of my best heifers to it. These aren't your regular small game traps, neither. They're steel jaw traps, big enough to snap a dog's leg clean off." Maria's stomach twisted at those words. She pretended to continue washing dishes while straining to hear more of the adults' conversation. Through the window, she could see Buck in the yard, his black and tan coat gleaming as he patrolled the perimeter of their property. Ash trotted behind him, matching the big dog's movements with surprising grace for such a small creature. "They're getting bolder," Harold agreed, his voice grave. "Caught sight of tire tracks near the backwoods last week. These poachers don't care whose land they're on or what they hurt. Already lost 2 of Cooper's sheep to those traps." Mrs. Cooper nodded, clutching her shawl tighter despite the warm day. "It's not just the livestock we need to worry about. My grandson's retriever stepped in one last month over in Marshall County. Poor thing." She didn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear. Maria's hands trembled as she dried another plate. Buck was smart and careful, but he ranged far when patrolling their land. And now Ash followed him everywhere, learning the property boundaries just as Buck had taught him. The thought of either of them stumbling into a hidden trap made her feel sick. "We need to organize regular patrols," one of the Williams brothers suggested. "Take turns checking the property lines, remove any traps we find. Maybe catch these folks in the act." "Already called the sheriff," Harold said. "But they can't spare the manpower to watch all our properties. We're on our own out here." Maria set down her dish towel and moved to the screen door, watching Buck and Ash more closely now. The kitten had grown significantly in the weeks since his rescue from the pond. Though still small, his frame had filled out, muscles developing beneath his gray, tabby coat. He moved with more confidence now, studying Buck's every action and trying to copy it. As she watched, Buck stopped suddenly, ears forward, focusing on something in the distance. Ash immediately froze too, adopting the same alert posture. After a moment, Buck relaxed, probably just a rabbit, and continued his patrol. Ash stayed right with him, matching his pace. "Would you look at that?" Mrs. Cooper said, noticing the pair. "That little cat thinks he's a guard dog." Harold made a dismissive sound. "Cat's just following Buck around because he knows he's safe that way. Won't ever be any real use on a farm." "I wouldn't be so sure," Mr. Jensen said thoughtfully. Cats can be right clever when they want to be, and that one seems to be learning from the best. Maria felt a surge of gratitude toward Mr. Jensen, but her father just shook his head. A cat's a cat, won't ever be more than that. Now, about these patrols. The adults returned to their planning, but Maria slipped outside, needing to be closer to her four-legged friends. Buck greeted her with a gentle headbutt, while Ash wound around her ankles, purring. She knelt down to scratch them both, trying to hide her worry. "You'll be careful, won't you?" she whispered. "Both of you? There are bad things out there." Buck's warm brown eyes met hers steadily, as if promising to stay alert. Ash stretched up to pat her knee with one paw, and Maria managed a small smile. But the knot of fear in her stomach wouldn't go away. The neighbors' voices drifted from the porch as they made plans to protect their properties. Maria caught fragments about patrol schedules and warning signs, about checking fence lines and watching for suspicious vehicles. Each word added to her growing sense of unease. She watched as Buck resumed his rounds, Ash still his faithful shadow. The big dog moved with purpose, checking each familiar landmark: the old oak tree, the corner post, the stack of hay bales. The kitten followed, absorbing each detail of their territory, learning Buck's careful ways. But Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. The safety of their farm suddenly felt fragile, threatened by hidden dangers and strangers who didn't care what damage they caused. She thought of the steel traps waiting in the tall grass, of Buck's protective nature that might lead him into danger, of Ash's growing courage that might not be enough to keep him safe. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. One by one, the neighbors headed home to their own properties and problems. Maria lingered in the yard until her mother called her in for supper, her eyes following Buck and Ash as they made one final circuit of the farm. They looked so natural together, the powerful dog and the small cat, united in their dedication to their home and family. But Maria's heart was heavy with worry, knowing that somewhere out in the gathering darkness, steel jaws waited to snap shut on the unwary. She could only pray that the bond between Buck and Ash, whatever her father might think of it, would be strong enough to help them face whatever trials lay ahead. The autumn sun hung low in the sky, painting the Tennessee hills in shades of amber and gold. Maria stood at the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of cocoa, watching Buck's familiar black and tan form move along the tree line. Ash perched on the windowsill beside her, his green eyes tracking the dog's movements with intense focus. "Don't go too far, Buck," Maria whispered, even though he couldn't hear her through the glass. Something about the lengthening shadows made her uneasy. Buck paused at the edge of the woods, his ears pricking forward. In a flash, he darted between the trees, disappearing into the growing darkness. Maria pressed her face against the window, straining to catch another glimpse of him. "He'll be back soon," she told herself. "He's probably just chasing a rabbit." But minutes stretched into an hour, and the golden evening light faded to deep purple. Still no Buck. Ash grew restless, pacing back and forth along the windowsill, his tail twitching. "Dad?" Maria called out, trying to keep the worry from her voice. "Buck hasn't come back yet." Harold looked up from his newspaper, frowning. "Probably caught scent of some deer. You know how he gets sometimes. But he always comes when I call." Maria set down her mug and grabbed her jacket. "I'm going to look for him." "Maria!" Her father started, but she was already out the door, Ash darting between her feet to follow. The evening air held an autumn chill that hadn't been there even a week ago. Dead leaves crunched under Maria's boots as she walked the path Buck had taken, calling his name. Each time her voice echoed back unanswered, the knot in her stomach grew tighter. "Buck, come home, boy!" Ash stayed close to her legs, occasionally letting out small, uncertain meows. The kitten had never been this far from the farmhouse after dark before. The woods loomed ahead, a wall of darkness broken only by patches of fading sky visible through the branches. Maria's fingers fumbled with the flashlight she'd grabbed on her way out. The beam seemed weak against the gathering night, barely reaching the first row of trees. She hesitated at the forest's edge, remembering her father's warnings about the poacher's traps. "Buck." Her voice cracked slightly. "Where are you?" "Maria!" Harold's voice carried from the direction of the house. "Come back in. It's getting too dark." "5 more minutes," she called back, taking a few steps into the woods. The trees seemed to close in around her, branches reaching like gnarled fingers overhead. Ash pressed against her ankle, trembling slightly. "Buck, please come home." Only the whisper of wind through dying leaves answered her. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness, making her jump. Ash's fur bristled. "Maria Whitfield!" Her father's voice was closer now, stern with worry. "Inside, now." Reluctantly, Maria turned back toward the house, her flashlight beam bouncing eerily across the ground. Each step away from the woods felt like a betrayal. Buck was out there somewhere. He had to be. Harold stood on the back porch, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the warm light spilling from the kitchen. "He's probably chased those deer clear to the next county by now," he said as Maria climbed the steps. "Might not see him again." "Don't say that." Maria's voice came out sharper than she intended. "He'll come back. He has to." Inside, her mother had made hot chocolate, the real kind, with milk and actual chocolate, not just powder. The special treatment only confirmed Maria's fears. They thought Buck was gone for good. "Try to get some sleep, sweetheart," her mother said softly. "Maybe he'll be waiting on the porch in the morning." But sleep was impossible. Maria lay in bed, fully dressed, listening to every sound from outside. The wind in the trees, an owl's lonely call, a distant coyote. But no familiar bark, no scratch of paws at the door. Ash curled up on her pillow, but he wasn't sleeping either. His eyes gleamed in the darkness, ears swiveling toward each new sound. Every so often he would get up, pace to the window, then return to his spot by her head. "You miss him too, don't you?" Maria whispered, scratching behind his ears. The kitten pressed his head into her hand, purring softly, but his eyes remained fixed on the window. The bond between them felt stronger somehow in Buck's absence, as if their shared worry created a new connection. Maria thought about how far Ash had come since that rainy day when Buck pulled him from the pond. From a half-drowned scrap of fur to a confident young cat who followed Buck everywhere, learning the ways of the farm. Now Buck was missing, and the night stretched endlessly ahead. Maria's mind kept circling back to the poacher's traps, imagining terrible scenarios. What if Buck was hurt somewhere in the darkness? What if he needed help? She got up several times to check the porch, hoping to see Buck's familiar shape in the moonlight. Each time, she found only empty shadows. Ash followed her every time, his little feet pattering on the wooden floors. Around midnight, she heard her parents talking in low voices in the kitchen. "Should we go look for him?" her mother asked. "In the dark? With those traps out there? Too dangerous?" Her father's voice was gruff but held an edge of concern. "If he doesn't show up by morning, I'll ride out and check the usual places." Maria pressed her face into her pillow, trying to muffle a sob. Buck had always been there, guarding the farm, protecting the family, saving small creatures like Ash. The thought of him alone in the dark, possibly hurt or trapped, was unbearable. Ash head-butted her chin gently, his purr growing louder. Maria wrapped her arms around the warm little body, drawing comfort from his presence. Together, they watched the moon crawl across the sky, waiting for any sign of their missing friend. But the night remained silent, and Buck did not return. The rain fell in icy sheets through the darkening forest. Buck lay in the mud, his powerful body trembling as he tried once again to free his front paw from the steel trap's merciless grip. The metal teeth had torn deep into his flesh, and each attempt to pull free sent waves of agony through his leg. He let out another howl, but the sound was lost in the drumming of rain on leaves and the moaning of wind through branches. The proud German Shepherd mix, who had never known defeat on the farm, now found himself utterly helpless. His thick black and tan fur was matted with mud and pine needles. Water ran in rivulets down his face, stinging his eyes as he looked desperately in the direction of home. Though home might as well have been on the moon for all the good it did him now. Back at the farmhouse, Maria sat at the kitchen window, her fingers pressed against the cold glass. The rain distorted everything beyond into watery shadows. Ash paced back and forth along the windowsill, his tail twitching anxiously. Every few minutes, he would let out a plaintive yowl that seemed to echo Buck's distant cries. "That cat's been carrying on like that for hours." Harold grumbled from his chair at the kitchen table. He folded his newspaper with sharp, irritated movements. "Ought to put it outside if it can't settle down." "No!" Maria spun around, her voice sharp with fear. "Please, Dad, something's wrong. I can feel it. Buck's in trouble." Harold's weathered face hardened. "Animals get lost sometimes, Maria. It's part of farm life. If Buck's meant to come home, he'll find his way." "How can you say that?" Maria's eyes filled with tears. "After everything Buck's done for us? For this farm?" "Being sentimental won't bring him back any faster," Harold said, his tone final. "He's either capable of surviving out there or he isn't. That's nature's way." Maria turned back to the window, her shoulders tight with anger and worry. Ash pressed against her arm, his green eyes fixed on the rain-dark woods. His yowling had taken on a different tone now, more urgent, more insistent. In the forest, Buck's strength was failing. The rain had soaked through to his skin, and the cold was seeping into his bones. The trap's cruel grip seemed to tighten with each passing hour. He had tried everything, pulling, digging, even attempting to bite through the metal. But nothing worked. His leg was a mass of pain, and exhaustion dragged at him like weights. A sound in the underbrush made his ears prick forward. Maybe help was coming. But no, it was only a deer, picking its way carefully through the wet forest. The animal paused, dark eyes regarding Buck with momentary interest before moving on. Buck watched it disappear into the gloom, feeling more alone than ever. At the farm, Maria couldn't bear to eat dinner. She pushed food around her plate while Ash continued his restless patrol of the kitchen windows, his cries growing hoarser, but no less determined. "Maria," her mother said gently, "you need to eat something." "I can't," Maria whispered. "Not while Buck's out there somewhere." Harold set down his fork with a sharp click. "This is exactly why I didn't want that kitten around in the first place. Makes you soft. Makes you forget that life isn't fair sometimes." "No," Maria said, finding a strength in her voice she didn't know she had. "Ash makes us better. He shows us what loyalty really means. Buck saw it that day at the pond. Why can't you—" The kitchen fell silent except for the rain, and Ash's continued yowling. Harold's face worked through several emotions before settling back into its usual stern lines. "Going to bed won't change anything," he said finally. "Either Buck makes it back, or he doesn't." In the woods, Buck's head drooped lower. The rain had become a steady drizzle, but he barely noticed anymore. His trapped paw had gone numb, and a dangerous lethargy was creeping over him. Through half-closed eyes, he watched the forest grow darker and darker, until he could barely see the trap that held him prisoner. Something stirred in his memory, a tiny wet bundle he'd pulled from the pond months ago. He'd recognized something in that kitten, a fight to live that matched his own. Now, as consciousness began to slip away, Buck wondered if he had that same fight left in him. The farmhouse lights glowed through the rain like distant stars. Maria lay fully clothed on her bed, listening to Ash's continued cries. The kitten hadn't stopped moving since Buck's disappearance, as if driven by some understanding beyond human comprehension. "Please," Maria whispered into the darkness. "Please let him be okay." But the rain kept falling, and Buck remained trapped in the darkening woods, his strength ebbing with each passing moment. The divide between Maria and her father had never felt wider, and the night stretched ahead like an endless road with no promise of dawn. Ash's yowls echoed through the house, a lonely chorus joined by the wind and rain, a song of loyalty and desperation that went unanswered in the gathering night. Ash stood at the kitchen window, his small body tense as a bowstring. The rain drummed against the glass, but something stronger than fear pulled at him now. With one final piercing yowl, he darted toward the pet door that Buck used, slipping through before Maria could notice. The storm hit him like a wall of water, his grey fur plastered against his tiny frame as he paused at the edge of the porch, green eyes scanning the darkness. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the path to the woods where Buck had disappeared. Without hesitation, Ash bounded down the steps and into the wet grass. The wind howled around him, bending the tall grass into waves. Rain stung his eyes, but he pressed forward, his paws sliding in the mud. The fields he knew from following Buck seemed strange and threatening now. Every shadow loomed larger, every sound more menacing. A quarter-mile from the house, Ash reached the first real obstacle, the creek that divided the Whitfield property. Usually a gentle stream, the rain had transformed it into a churning mass of brown water and debris. Ash paced the bank, his heart pounding. Buck needed him. There was no turning back. Finding a fallen branch that stretched part-way across, Ash crept forward. His claws dug into the wet bark as he inched along. Halfway across, his back paw slipped. For one terrifying moment, he dangled over the rushing water, front claws desperately gripping the wood. With a strength born of desperation, he pulled himself back up, trembling but determined. Just as he reached the other side, a shadow passed overhead. A great horned owl, its wingspan wider than the creek itself, dove toward him. Ash flattened himself against the ground, feeling the rush of air as massive talons swept inches above his head. The owl wheeled for another pass, but Ash was already running, darting under a thorny bramble where the larger bird couldn't follow. Inside the farmhouse, Maria finally noticed the silence. Ash's cries had stopped. She rushed to the kitchen calling his name, but found only empty space where the kitten had been keeping vigil. "Mom!" she called out, panic rising in her throat. "Ash is gone!" Her mother hurried in, wiping her hands on her apron. "Gone? But how?" "The pet door," Maria said, pointing. "He must have gone after Buck." Harold appeared in the doorway, his face dark with concern, despite his usual gruffness. "That little scrap of fur won't last 10 minutes in this weather." "We have to go look for them." Maria grabbed her raincoat from its hook. "Not in this storm," Harold said firmly, catching her arm. "It's too dangerous in the dark. We'd never find them." "But Dad—" "No." His voice softened slightly. "First light. If the rain lets up, we'll search. That's the best we can do." Maria pressed her forehead against the cold window, tears mixing with the raindrops on the glass. "Please be careful," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she meant Buck or Ash anymore. In the forest, Ash pushed deeper into unknown territory. The trees loomed overhead, their branches creaking in the wind. Every step took him further from safety, from the warm kitchen and Maria's gentle hands. But something pulled him forward, the same instinct that had drawn Buck into the pond to save him months ago. His tiny paws were numb with cold, and burrs caught in his fur, but he didn't slow down. When thorns scratched his nose, he pushed through. When his legs trembled with exhaustion, he kept going. The rain continued to fall, but Ash had stopped noticing it, focused entirely on following some invisible trail that only his heart could see. Back at the farm, Maria paced her room, unable to sleep. The storm raged outside her window, and somewhere in that darkness, two creatures she loved were fighting for survival. She thought about the day Buck had pulled Ash from the pond, how her father had said the kitten wouldn't survive. But Ash had proved him wrong, growing stronger each day under Buck's protection. They're connected, she whispered to herself. That's why Ash left. He knows Buck needs help. The night stretched on, each minute feeling like an hour. The wind howled around the farmhouse corners, carrying with it the sound of creaking trees and rattling windows. Maria imagined Ash out there, so small against the storm's fury, driven by a loyalty that defied explanation. In the forest, Ash paused beneath a fallen log, shaking water from his fur. His muscles ached, and his paws left tiny, bloody prints in the mud from where thorns had cut them. But something told him he was getting closer. He could feel it in the way the air changed, in the faint but familiar scent that the rain couldn't quite wash away. The darkness pressed in around him, full of strange sounds and movements. An owl called again in the distance, reminding him of his narrow escape. Somewhere, a fox barked, and Ash's fur stood on end. He was prey out here, small and vulnerable. But he was also something else, a creature on a mission, driven by a force stronger than fear. Lightning flashed again, briefly illuminating the forest floor ahead. Ash's keen eyes caught something metallic gleaming in the brief light. His heart quickened as he crept forward, instinct telling him he was close to his goal. The rain had lessened to a steady drizzle now, and in the relative quiet, he heard something else, a low whimper that made his ears prick forward. He knew that sound. It was the same gentle voice that had comforted him through countless storms, the same presence that had stood between him and danger since the day he was pulled from the pond. Buck was close, and he needed help. With renewed determination, Ash moved forward into the darkness, his small body trembling with cold and exhaustion, but his spirit unbroken. The bond between the unlikely pair, the dog who had saved him and the kitten who now sought to return that favor, pushed him onward through the night, proving that courage sometimes comes in the smallest packages. The forest stretched ahead, dark and forbidding, but Ash didn't hesitate. He had come too far to turn back now. The rain continued to fall, and somewhere in the farmhouse, Maria kept her vigil, unaware that her small, fragile kitten was about to prove its worth in ways none of them could have imagined. The midnight silence at the Whitfield farm shattered with a desperate scratching at the kitchen door. The sound was frantic, almost panicked, accompanied by high-pitched yowls that cut through the steady drumming of rain. Inside her bedroom, Maria jolted awake, her heart pounding. Those cries weren't the usual nighttime sounds of the farm. They carried urgency, desperation. She threw off her covers and rushed downstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time. The wooden floor was cold against her bare feet as she hurried to the kitchen. The scratching grew more intense, punctuated by plaintive meows that made her stomach twist with worry. When Maria opened the door, she gasped. There on the doorstep stood Ash, but not the proud little cat she knew. This was a creature pushed to its limits. The kitten's grey fur was plastered to its tiny frame, dark with mud and rain. Leaves and thorns clung to its coat, and its green eyes were wide with desperation. Tiny red footprints marked the porch where its paws had bled from the journey. "Oh, Ash!" Maria dropped to her knees, reaching for the kitten. But instead of running to her arms as usual, Ash backed away, crying louder. The kitten took a few steps toward the darkness, then looked back at her, meowing insistently. "What is all that racket?" Harold's gruff voice came from the stairs. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, tying his robe. Maria, what are you doing up at this hour? It's Ash, Dad. Look at him. Something's wrong. Maria pointed to the kitten, which continued its urgent dance between them and the darkness. I think he knows where Buck is. Harold's face hardened. Now, Maria, don't start with foolishness. It's the middle of the night, and that cat's probably just scared of the storm. But Maria saw something in Ash's behavior that went beyond fear. The kitten was purposeful, determined, despite its exhausted state. Dad, please, look at him. He's trying to tell us something. He's been out there in the woods. Maybe he found Buck. A house cat leading us to a lost dog? That's not how things work, Maria. Harold shook his head, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice as he watched Ash's persistent behavior. The kitten grew more frantic, its cries more demanding. It ran a few feet into the rain, then back to the porch, repeating the motion with increasing urgency. Maria felt tears welling in her eyes. Please, Dad. What if Buck is hurt? What if he needs us? She grabbed her rain jacket from the hook by the door. We have to try. Harold stood silent for a long moment, watching his daughter's determined face and the desperate kitten. Finally, he sighed heavily. Let me get the lantern and my boots, and you're putting on proper clothes first. No arguments. Maria ran upstairs, her heart racing. She threw on jeans and her warmest sweater, then pulled on her rubber boots. When she returned to the kitchen, her father was already dressed, checking the oil in their old storm lantern. If we're doing this foolishness, we're doing it right, he said, his voice gruff but no longer dismissive. Stay close to me, and if I say we turn back, we turn back. Understood? Maria nodded quickly, too grateful for his agreement to argue. Outside, Ash waited impatiently, pacing the porch. As soon as they stepped out, the kitten bounded down the steps, stopping to make sure they followed. The rain had settled into a steady drizzle, but the night was pitch black. Harold's lantern cast a small circle of yellow light that seemed to get swallowed by the darkness. Ash stayed just at the edge of the light, a small grey shadow leading them across the field towards the woods. This is crazy, Harold muttered, but he kept pace, holding the lantern high. Following a cat through the rain in the middle of the night. Maria stayed close to her father, her eyes fixed on Ash. The kitten moved with purpose, despite its obvious exhaustion. Sometimes it would pause, waiting for them to catch up, its eyes reflecting the lantern light like tiny green beacons in the darkness. They crossed the first field, then the creek where the spring planting usually began. The woods loomed ahead, a wall of darkness that even the lantern couldn't penetrate. Maria felt her father hesitate as they reached the tree line. Maria. He started, but Ash's urgent cry cut him off. The kitten darted back to them, circling their feet before heading into the trees with renewed determination. We have to keep going, Dad, Maria said softly. We're already soaked. Might as well see where he's taking us. Harold adjusted his grip on the lantern, his jaw set. Stay within arm's reach of me. These woods aren't safe at night. They pushed into the forest, following Ash's lead. The going was slower here. Branches caught their clothes, and roots threatened to trip them in the darkness. The lantern light created strange shadows that danced between the trees. But Ash never faltered, choosing their path with unwavering certainty. The kitten led them deeper into the woods than Maria had ever been. She could feel her father's tension growing with each step, but he didn't turn back. Perhaps he too sensed the importance of their midnight journey, or maybe he just couldn't bear to disappoint his daughter's faith. Ash's cries changed suddenly, becoming sharper, more insistent. The kitten darted ahead, then back, practically vibrating with urgency. Harold raised the lantern higher, and its light caught something metallic among the leaves. Oh no! Harold breathed, moving forward more quickly now. No, no, no! The light revealed what Ash had been trying to tell them all along. There, trapped in the cruel jaws of a steel trap, lay Buck. The big dog's fur was matted with mud and blood, his trapped paw mangled by his attempts to free himself. But at the sight of them, his tail thumped weakly against the ground. "Buck!" Maria started forward, but Harold caught her arm. "Let me check the area first," he said grimly. "There might be more traps." He moved the lantern in a slow arc, scanning the ground carefully before allowing them to approach. Ash was already at Buck's side, pressing against the big dog's neck in a gesture of comfort. Buck's eyes were glazed with pain, but he managed to lift his head slightly, acknowledging their presence with a soft whine. "That damn trap's illegal," Harold muttered, kneeling beside Buck. "Those poachers ought to be shot." But his hands were gentle as he examined the trap's mechanism. "Maria, hold the lantern steady. We're going to get him out of this, boy," he added softly to Buck. "Just hold on." The beam of Harold's lantern illuminated Buck's desperate situation in harsh detail. The steel trap had bitten deep into his front paw, its cruel teeth stained dark with blood. The proud German Shepherd mix, usually so strong and dignified, lay shivering in the mud. His thick black and tan fur was matted and filthy, his eyes glazed with exhaustion and pain. Maria dropped to her knees beside Buck, tears streaming down her face. "Daddy, please, we have to help him." Her voice cracked with desperation as she reached out to touch Buck's head. The dog tried to lift his muzzle toward her hand, but even that small movement seemed to cost him dearly. Harold set the lantern down carefully, positioning it to cast the best light on the trap. His weathered face was grim as he examined the mechanism. "These traps are meant for deer, not dogs," he muttered, anger threading through his words. "Cursed poachers don't care what they catch, long as they get something." Ash pressed close against Buck's neck, purring loudly as if trying to comfort the bigger animal. The tiny grey kitten looked exhausted from its journey, but refused to leave Buck's side. Rain continued to fall in a steady drizzle, soaking them all to the bone. "Can you get it open?" Maria asked, her voice small and frightened. She stroked Buck's wet fur, trying to offer what comfort she could. "He's so cold, Daddy." Harold's hands moved carefully around the trap's mechanism, testing its strength. "It's going to take some doing. These springs are powerful. That's why Buck couldn't free himself." He shrugged off his jacket and handed it to Maria. "Here, try to keep him warm while I work." Maria draped the jacket over Buck's shivering form, tucking it around him as best she could. Ash immediately crawled under the edge of the coat, pressing its small body against Buck's chest. The dog's tail thumped once, weakly, acknowledging the kitten's presence. Harold knelt in the mud, his hands exploring the trap's mechanism. "Maria, hold the lantern steady. I need to see what I'm doing." His voice was focused now, all business. "These traps have a spring on each side. I'll have to compress them both at once to release the jaws." Maria held the light with trembling hands while her father worked. The rain made everything slippery, and Harold had to wipe his hands repeatedly on his shirt to maintain his grip. His first attempt to compress the springs failed, the metal refusing to yield. Come on," he muttered, repositioning his hands. Sweat mixed with rain on his forehead despite the cool night air. Buck whimpered as the trap shifted slightly, and Maria had to blink back fresh tears. "Stay still, boy," Harold said softly to Buck. "We're going to get you out of this mess." The gentleness in his voice surprised Maria. It had been years since she'd heard him speak so kindly to any animal. On his second attempt, Harold managed to compress one spring, but the other held firm. The trap's jaws loosened slightly, but not enough to free Buck's paw. Harold's arms shook with the effort of maintaining pressure on the spring while he tried to work the other side. "Maria, I need you to help," he said finally. "Come here, keep pressure on this spring while I work on the other one. Careful now, it's powerful." Maria set down the lantern and moved to help, her small hands replacing her father's on the compressed spring. It took all her strength to hold it down, and she could feel the metal fighting to snap back into place. "That's it, hold it steady," Harold encouraged her. He shifted his attention to the second spring, his muscles straining as he fought against the mechanism. Almost. The second spring finally gave way with a metallic groan. The trap's jaws sprang open, releasing their grip on Buck's mangled paw. The dog pulled his leg free with a yelp of pain, then collapsed against Maria. "Easy, easy," Harold soothed, quickly throwing the trap aside. He helped Maria gather Buck into her arms, the big dog trembling violently now that the ordeal was over. Ash remained pressed against Buck's chest, its loud purring a steady comfort in the rainy darkness. Harold sat back on his heels, breathing heavily from the exertion. He looked at Buck's injured paw, then at the small grey kitten that had led them here. For a long moment, he was silent, his expression unreadable in the lantern light. "That little cat," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "That little scrap of nothing I said wouldn't survive." He reached out and gently touched Ash's head. "If it hadn't been for him, we'd never have found Buck in time. He'd have died out here, alone in the dark." Maria hugged Buck tighter, her tears falling into his wet fur. Ash knew. He knew Buck needed help. Harold nodded slowly. Yes, he did. And he was brave enough to face the storm and the woods to get that help. He stroked Buck's head, then Ash's. "I was wrong about him, Maria, dead wrong. That kitten's got more heart and courage than I gave him credit for." The admission seemed to cost Harold something, but his voice was firm. Sometimes the smallest things prove to have the greatest worth. It's not always about being the biggest or the strongest. He looked at his daughter, a new understanding in his eyes. Sometimes it's about being loyal enough, brave enough, to do what needs doing, no matter how impossible it seems. Buck stirred slightly, pressing his nose against Ash's small form. The kitten responded by rubbing its face against the dog's muzzle, their bond evident even in this moment of exhaustion and pain. "We need to get him home," Harold said, rising to his feet. "That paw needs tending, and they both need to get warm and dry." He bent down and carefully gathered Buck into his arms, grunting at the big dog's weight. "Maria, grab the lantern. Ash can either walk or you can carry him. His choice." Ash made the decision for them, climbing wearily into Maria's arms as soon as she reached for him. The kitten seemed to understand its job was done. It had brought help to its friend, and now it could rest. As they made their way back through the dark woods, Harold carrying Buck while Maria lit the way, the rain began to ease. The lantern's glow caught countless droplets, making them sparkle like tiny stars among the trees. Despite Buck's injury and their own exhaustion, there was a sense of rightness to their slow procession homeward. "Tomorrow," Harold said quietly as they walked, "we'll make sure Buck's paw is properly treated. And—" he paused, glancing at the kitten in Maria's arms. "We'll find a proper place for Ash in the house. No more sleeping in the barn. He's earned his place with the family." Maria hugged Ash closer, fresh tears spilling. But these were tears of joy. Her father's words meant more than just shelter for the kitten. They were an acknowledgement of everything she had tried to show him. That worth wasn't measured in size or strength alone, that loyalty and courage could come in the most unexpected packages, and that sometimes the smallest hearts could hold the greatest love. The Whitfield farmhouse kitchen glowed warm in the early morning light. Maria carefully changed the bandage on Buck's injured paw, her touch gentle as she wrapped the clean white gauze around the healing wound. The big dog lay quietly on his blanket by the hearth, patient under her ministrations. Ash sat nearby, those bright green eyes watching every movement with intense focus, just as the kitten had done every morning for the past 2 weeks. "There you go, boy," Maria said softly, securing the bandage. "Dr. Thompson says you're healing up real nice." She stroked Buck's head, and he responded with a gentle thump of his tail against the floor. The veterinarian had been impressed with how well the injury was mending, though he warned there would always be a scar and perhaps a slight limp. Harold entered from outside, stamping his boots on the mat. His eyes fell on the scene by the hearth, and his expression softened. "How's our patient doing this morning?" "Better every day," Maria answered, still petting Buck. "He even tried to put some weight on it yesterday." Her father nodded, hanging up his coat. "That's good. Strong dog like Buck. He'll be back on his feet before we know it." He paused, then added with a small smile, "Thanks to his brave little friend here." He reached down to scratch behind Ash's ears, and the kitten, no longer quite so tiny, leaned into his touch with a loud purr. The change in her father still amazed Maria. Since that night in the woods, Harold's gruff exterior had given way to something gentler, especially where Ash was concerned. The kitten now had its own cushion next to Buck's blanket, a proper food bowl in the kitchen, and free run of the house. More than that, Harold often spoke to Ash directly, sharing his thoughts as he might with Buck or any other trusted companion. "You know," Harold said, settling into his chair at the kitchen table, "I was thinking about that night when Ash led us to Buck." He accepted the cup of coffee Maria's mother passed him with a grateful nod. "I've spent my whole life believing that survival meant being tough, being strong, that anything else was just—" He shook his head. "Just taking up space." Maria sat at the table across from him, while her mother joined them with her own coffee. In the background, the morning sun painted the kitchen walls in shades of gold. "But that little cat proved me wrong," Harold continued. "When Buck needed help, it wasn't strength that saved him. It was loyalty, courage, the kind that makes you face down your fears because someone you love needs you." He looked at Maria. "The kind you showed when you stood up for Ash, even when I said no." Maria felt tears prick at her eyes. "I just knew he belonged here, Dad, from the moment Buck pulled him from the pond." "You did," Harold agreed. "You saw what I couldn't, that sometimes the greatest strength comes in the smallest packages." He glanced at Ash, who had curled up against Buck's side. That kitten faced down a storm, crossed through woods full of predators, forded a flooding creek, all to save his friend. That's not just survival, that's something more. Buck shifted on his blanket, making room as Ash snuggled closer. The unlikely pair had grown even more inseparable since the incident with the trap. Where Buck went, Ash followed, and the big dog seemed to take comfort in the kitten's constant presence during his recovery. "It's changed all of us," Maria's mother observed quietly. "This whole family feels different now." Harold reached across the table and took his wife's hand. "It does. Maybe we needed that reminder that life isn't just about being tough enough to make it through. It's about being there for each other, no matter what comes." As if to emphasize the point, Buck let out a soft whine. Immediately, Ash was up, pressing against the dog's neck and purring loudly. The sound seemed to soothe Buck, and he relaxed again, secure in his friend's presence. "We're all stronger together," Maria said, watching them, "like Buck and Ash." "Yes," Harold agreed. "And from now on, that's how we'll face things, together. No one in this family faces danger alone again, whether they walk on 2 legs or 4. Maria's mother smiled, squeezing Harold's hand. "I think that's a promise worth keeping." The morning light grew stronger, warming the kitchen and its occupants. Buck dozed on his blanket, healing a little more each day, while Ash kept faithful watch. Maria saw in them the truth her father had finally recognized. That real strength often came disguised as gentleness, that courage could wear the face of compassion, and that love, in the end, was the greatest power of all. Harold stood, preparing to head out for his morning chores, but before he left, he paused by Buck's blanket, kneeling down to pat both dog and cat. "You two rest up," he said softly. "You've earned it." Then, with a gentle touch that would have surprised the Harold of just a few weeks ago, he added, "Thank you for teaching this old farmer a thing or two about what really matters." Ash's purr grew louder, and Buck's tail thumped against the floor. In their own way, they seemed to understand that they had helped forge something new and precious in the Whitfield home, a deeper understanding of loyalty, courage, and the unexpected ways love could transform a family. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.